All right. Welcome to In Service, everyone. Hopefully, we get more people here. This is our last In Service of the year, and we have Adult Protective Services with us, and we have Megan Schmidt, who is going to be presenting to us. Before we get going, though, I have a couple of announcements, and then we have Mary, who's going to come up and just has a couple of quick, just a quick announcement. Okay, so let me really quick. Okay, office. They wanted me to tell you to make sure to check your emails, okay? And if you have extra availability throughout the holidays, to let them know. Also, we're always hiring, and if you refer a caregiver who stays for 90 days, you get a $100 bonus. So if you feel sick, don't wait until you're really sick. If you're starting to feel sick, let the office know as soon as possible. And they recommend that you do get flu shots or immunizations. That seems to really help. Leave yourself time to get to your client. If it's pretty soon, we're going to be in the snow. And I know I usually work nights, but the traffic, you guys know this better than I do, but I covered a shift out in American Fork at 4 o'clock, and oh my gosh, it was awful. So leave yourself time so that you can get to your clients on time, because it is terrible out. I mean, you guys know this better than I do, but oh my gosh. And you want to be calm when you get to your client too. And if you have to fight that traffic and be a nervous wreck because you know you're going to be late, yeah, okay. Also, if you read in the emails that went out, Aspen has a list of kind of handyman services they put together. So if you notice that your clients might need help with, I don't know, some of them even like changing light bulbs that are up really high, or any kind of services, you can have them. Well, this letter went out to our clients too, but it's not a service that Aspen is providing, but it's more like a partnership, so they're referring to. But if you notice, like with snow removal, if they need help with snow removal, we'll have them call the office, and the office can refer them to someone for snow removal. Hopefully we don't get as much as we did last year, but you never know. Okay. And then we'll be sending out this flyer soon, but we're not going to have a caregiver appreciation day next month for December, but we are going to have a Christmas party all week long, the week of December 18th through the 22nd. Okay. And so we want you to come by the office, and we're going to, the week of the 18th through the 22nd, for a light lunch and a gift card. And they're going to have fun treats and activities like we used to do at the old Christmas parties we used to have. We'll have cookie decorating, and you can bring your families if you want, and just a time to come and spend time at the office, and we'll have some activities and fun things to do. There'll be more information coming on that, but that'll be the week before Christmas. Okay. So I'm going to turn the time over to Mary really quick, and then we'll jump in with Megan. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Okay.
Hello, my name is Mary Tanner. I don't know, some of you might remember me from a couple months back. I did the September in service on caregiver well-being, and also that week-long party sounds awesome. So that's great. Just wanted to come by one more time and see if anyone here would be willing to fill out the post surveys. Doing this for my doctorate project, and so just trying to get as many responses as possible to get the more data I get, the more kind of I'm able to make whether or not the program is meaningful or not. So, oh, you're good. Hopefully they can hear on the recording. But I'll pass around these post surveys. If you've taken it already, thank you so much. If not, and you're willing to, even if you haven't done any of the online modules, that's totally fine, as long as you attended the Wellness Month in September. That would be super awesome. And I'll stick around, so if you have any questions afterwards, I'll be here. So, and just one last reminder to keep calm and carry on, and you guys are awesome. So, thanks so much.
Okay, you guys, I'm good. Okay, perfect. Hi, everybody. I am Megan Schmidt. I'm the training manager with Adult Protective Services. The caregiver well-being, that's a good topic to talk about because we will actually talk about the cost of caring today and being a direct care provider and how to recognize signs of like caregiver burnout in your employees, in yourselves, and your coworkers, all of those things. So if you do have any questions, it's best just to ask them as it arises, like if you see it on the slide. I will share a PDF of the slides, so you'll be able to have those for review. Also, I'm going to mention it now so I do not forget. We have new intake business cards. And so I will leave these here. There's actually a QR code that you can scan if you want to do the online referral, and it'll bring you right to our website to make a report, but it also has our reporting information. And then I will also leave just some of our new flyers that we have since we have rebranded. So it just shows like signs of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and then reporting information. So I'll leave both of these that you can kind of put up in the main office. All right. Perfect. So just to start looking at stats on aging, so I'm a social worker, but when it comes to thinking about numbers, it helps me kind of relate the information that we're going to talk about. The big thing to know is the arrows that are pointing kind of across are looking at Utah specifically. And so this is from the 2020 census. And the arrow that I want you to pay the most attention to is that percent increase from 2009 to 2019. And what's that showing is for 65 plus, that age group grew by almost 50% in Utah. And so that's never happened before. So it's something that's kind of unprecedented. But the other thing is to relate, do you feel like that the home health hospice, just kind of the home care industry grew by 50% in that 10 years to be able to match that 50% population growth? So yeah. And what I can tell you with Adult Protective Services or aging services in general through the state, we did not grow by 50% to match that. And that 65 age range is important for a lot of reasons, and we'll touch on it in a few minutes, but it's because that's the age that you officially become vulnerable in the state of Utah. And so those are now a whole new kind of age range and population that we are serving with Adult Protective Services, but we did not grow by 50% in order to match that population growth. So one thing that, and it's also important for us to talk a little bit about as it relates to disabilities, the main reason this comes from the 2020 census is we oftentimes think about those disabilities as those that we can kind of physically see. So if somebody is using maybe a wheelchair for ambulation, or if they are requiring the use of another assisted device in order for allow a level of independence. But what we're seeing here is that 1 in 5 Utah adults identified as having a disability. And so that number is pretty staggering. When you look at it, it relates to roughly 500,000 Utah adults that are identifying as having a disability, which the number is a lot higher than I thought it was. Yeah, go ahead. Yep. So anybody that's age 18 plus is an adult. So yep, it's from 18 plus that they're identifying as having a disability. And it doesn't, I don't have it in here because it really gets into kind of the nitty gritty of it, but it's looking at anything from like a workplace injury, so like workman's comp, but it's also a lifelong disability. It's also an age-related disability. We're seeing more adults as they're aging are identifying with having a disability in some various form. So we're seeing it kind of coming in a lot of different ways. But the number is a lot higher than I thought it would be. So thinking of like 22% of our population is identifying as having a disability. So then shifting into kind of the aging brain, we won't take too much time in this area, mainly because the more time we spend here, the more time you are going to identify yourself, your spouse, a family member, somebody will have dementia by the time we leave in your mindset. So we'll just kind of move through the things pretty quickly. The big thing for you to know, especially as it relates to the direct care that you're doing, but then also the work that you're doing in the communities, is that what we're seeing is the skills that remain the same as we age. So those processing skills, the multitasking different things, the skills that you've acquired through adulthood, those things maintain the same. So when people are saying, I can't remember, or if you're forgetting somebody's name, So I fully expect all of you to forget my name after I leave. You may see me somewhere and be like, she looks kind of familiar, but I don't remember where I saw her from. That's totally normal. It does not mean that your brain is aging in a way that we don't want it to. For the same reason that if you are losing your keys constantly, that does not mean that your brain is not aging the way that it should. I can tell you, and I'll show you from personal experience, I now have one of these because I was frequently putting my keys in a different spot, or my kids were moving them, or different things. I kind of thought I was losing my mind for a little bit. Now I have one of these, and I, for the most part, know where my keys are. But it also shows that it's because your brain is multitasking, it's doing multiple things. So if those things are happening, or if you are working with somebody who's identifying concerns in those areas, it does not make that leap to like a cognitive disorder or an impairment for them. It's just a part of our aging brain. So, but then looking at the cognitive impairment side, what we know is that there's kind of a spectrum. So you can think about it from that mild to severe area. And so for those individuals with a mild cognitive impairment, they're generally still living on their own, able to function pretty independently. They may just start to forget some kind of minor tasks because they're usually doing multiple things during the day. When we move into kind of the severe levels of impairment, those are the individuals that generally are requiring either care and assistance coming into the home. So a lot of those individuals that you are serving, it could be that they have a caregiver that's moved in with them, or potentially even moving into like a care facility because they're no longer able to safely meet their needs at home. So it is kind of one that, and that mild to severe can take years. For some people, it can take 10 to 15 years to move from one end of it to the other. For others, it seems like it happens much more quickly, but it's probably because we missed the mild signs for several years. And then all of a sudden we're catching it in the moderate to severe category for that individual. And it's usually because they're found wandering out in the middle of winter in their house coat, or they're driving and all of a sudden they can't figure out how to get back home. So those are the things that we're seeing. Those are not the mild signs. Those are where we're looking at more of like the moderate to severe signs. So then what is dementia? This is a common question that gets asked. And the main reason why is because, and let me know if this is something you've heard, where there's that idea of I'm going to be diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's. Like people will feel like they're going to get diagnosed with one or the other. And in reality, dementia is kind of the umbrella. And underneath in the umbrella are those specific forms like Alzheimer's disease, like Lewy body dementia, like Pick's dementia. So the dementia piece of it is like just a general term that describes symptoms. And then those actual diagnoses are where we're looking at those specific forms that are in there. And the big thing to know, Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, but it's not a normal part of aging. So if you were working with individuals or within your own family, if you've got somebody that does have a dementia diagnosis or Alzheimer's, it does not automatically mean that all members of your family will be diagnosed with that. It also impacts everybody in a different way. So there are just some things to keep in mind. The big thing to take away from this is knowing where the numbers are going. So how prevalent these cognitive impairments are. So in 2014, there was estimated of 5 million adults across the US that had a diagnosis of a cognitive impairment. By 2060, it's estimated to be 14 million. So then it kind of comes back to that idea. Do you feel like 2060 seems like so far away? I mean, we've got like 36 years before we're even kind of getting into that area. But do you feel that your workforce and your ability to serve those individuals is going to grow by three times essentially in the next 35 years? So it's kind of looking at that idea of how do we continue to help serve those in our community, and especially matching that idea that our older adults, they want to age in place. They want to age in their homes and be able to live their lives in their homes. So how can we match those services and those needs for them and still keep you wanting to be in the workforce? So those are the two things of finding that parallel. So then shifting into what is elder abuse. The World Health Organization, they sum it up pretty well. The big thing that I want you to take away, it's kind of a little bit hard to see, the screen's not too terribly big, but the two areas that are underlined. So as it relates to elder abuse, we will have folks that will call and say, I would have called sooner, but I thought I had to establish a pattern, or I thought I had to be able to show that this had been happening over and over again. And as it relates to elder abuse or older adult abuse, it only has to happen once. If there's one situation that's occurred, that's a form of abuse and that can be reported to us. The other area that's I feel like is the most important is that expectation of trust. And what that means is that there is somebody that is living in the community or aging in a care center or trying to maintain a level of independence, but they recognize they may need a level of help. And then a person of trust has stepped into that position, whether it be a paid caregiver, a medical provider, a family member, and then they violated that trust in some way. And then that person is now a victim of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So those are the two areas that we oftentimes want to look at. Our last stat that we will look at is looking at crimes against people with disabilities. And the reason why this is important for us to look at, beyond just the numbers, it tells us that individuals that identify with a disability, they are perpetrated against at an exponentially higher rate than those that don't identify with a disability. So we can see where it's saying they are representing 12% of the population, but they're 26% in terms of the population of non-fatal crimes that are happening. And so we're seeing it's a disproportionate number, whereas especially down at the bottom as it relates to like sexual assault or sexual abuse, those with disabilities, their rate of reporting or having somebody report on their behalf is much lower than the general population. So, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but those are just, it's good to know that those numbers are not matching up to relate to what the population should be at. Any questions so far? I know I've spewed kind of a whole lot of information so far, but okay. Remember, just stop me if you do have any questions. So what do all of these stats and different things that we've talked about, what does it have to do with Adult Protective Services? So this is looking at our vision and our mission. So Adult Protective Services, or APS, we kind of go by both names. We are trying to do more of the identifying as Adult Protective Services, mainly because what we're seeing is when our investigators go out and identify themselves with APS, and this has happened with me before, we will have people say, like, you don't really look like a probation officer. So they assume they connect us with AP&P, which is Adult Probation and Parole. So there's kind of that misconception that's out there. So even if it would relate to you having a conversation with somebody that you're providing care for or a family member, if you say, I think this is something that needs to be reported to APS, like, please spell that out for them to know. Because if they have a family member that's ever been in the criminal justice system, they will likely think this is going to the courts. So it's good for them just to know kind of what those differences are. The one thing that you need to take away from this slide is what our vision statement is, and that's that offering choices for independence. The big thing to know with that is that our investigators, so those that are going out to investigate abuse, neglect, and exploitation, we are wanting to honor the choices of those that we're serving in the community. And so those choices do not always match up with what caregivers, families, medical providers feel. Does anybody ever have a situation, and whether you want to share it or not, where you've provided care for somebody and you just kind of have this feeling, and after talking to family and different things, that this person would probably do much better living in a care setting, but they really want to live in their homes? And so that's kind of where we see that a lot. We get family members, CNAs, medical providers that will call and they'll say, this person is really struggling in their home. We really feel it would be beneficial for them to live in a care center. And so that report comes into us. It's usually for self-neglect or caretaker neglect. And we go out there and that older adult is like, I have lived in my home for 60 years. This is where I want to live. This is where I want to die. This is what I want to do. I don't want to spend my remaining years in a care setting. And so if we are able to bring services in to help that and make that a reality for that person, that's the avenue that we're going down, even though it's going against what the medical provider wants, what that family wants, what those other care providers are wanting for that person. We are wanting to make sure that we can offer choices for independence as long as we can help keep that person safe in their environment. So who is Adult Protective Services? We are the state agency with the responsibility and authority to investigate abuse, neglect, and exploitation for vulnerable adults. So let's define who is a vulnerable adult. I mentioned it kind of at the beginning as it relates to age. So now we'll kind of look at it. So we have two categories for vulnerable adults in the state. So this may come as a shock. I feel like every single time I present, somebody is baffled by this, but an elder adult is considered somebody who is age 65 plus in the state of Utah. So if you are age 65 plus, you are automatically vulnerable for the remainder of your life that you reside in Utah. So, and the reason why that's so staggering is probably majority of the 65 plus that you know are working, they're living independently, they are traveling, they're driving, they're doing all of those things on their own. And so an example I can give is one of our staff members that helps us with our kind of our legal side and our administrative hearings. She's 65 plus and she works like 80 hours a week. So for her, the idea of being vulnerable is baffling. But also think about those that you're serving in the community. You probably are serving a lot of individuals that are maybe 65 or younger that are very vulnerable and need a high level of care and a lot of services. So that's just kind of where that number sits. It's just that's where the number will continue to be until our legislation would say it needs to be changed. So 65 plus is the first category. And then anybody that's age 18 or older, so 18 to 64, that has a mental or physical impairment that substantially impacts their ability to care for themselves. And so it's different for everybody. There's no diagnosis, condition, disorder that automatically makes somebody vulnerable. It's different for each individual. So let's look at kind of the different categories. So these are kind of the 6 factors or 6 domains that our investigators look at to determine vulnerability for somebody. So between that 1 through 6, does anybody want to take a guess of which one you feel like we see most commonly? You can just shout it out. Any guesses? Yes. 4? Okay. 4 or 5? Okay. So it's actually not necessarily a tie, but it's pretty parallel between 5 and 6. So managing their own finances and then comprehending the nature and consequences of remaining in that situation. And there's a couple reasons why. We do see that with we usually see if they're maybe number 5 and 6, they also have maybe 2, 3, and 4. So there's usually a multitude of things, but these are the ones that we're kind of seeing most commonly. One of the reasons why number 5 is because financial exploitation is our number 1 allegation. It's the fastest growing in the US. So it's the number 1 thing that we're seeing, to where it's because individuals are no longer able to manage their finances. So they've trusted somebody else to kind of help in that situation, and now they're being kind of exploited. Number 6, the reason why that one has become so prevalent is because a lot of our, who we call perpetrators, they are immediate family members. So it's adult children, spouses. And so for a lot of our older adults, it's been a lifetime of whatever has been happening. So it's been a lifetime of physical abuse. It's been a lifetime of emotional abuse. And so it's all they know. So in their mind, the idea of remaining in this situation, this is just, they've always been in this situation. They've been married for 45 years. This is how their husband has always spoken to them. And so, those are the 2 things that we're seeing more and more, especially as we're seeing people living longer, aging in their homes. We're working with families where the spouses have been married for 65 plus years. And so it's one of those things where if you've had 65 years of that with your marriage, it's all you've known. And so you don't necessarily know that you're being emotionally abused. So those are the things that we're oftentimes seeing. So what APS can do. The reason why it's important for us to talk about this, one of the main reasons is that there is a misconception out there that Adult Protective Services is Child Protective Services for adults. That we will go into homes, we will remove people from their homes, we will take custody of them, that we will place them in nursing homes, different things like that, which in reality, none of that is true. So it's something, but it's used as kind of a miseducation. It's also used as threats by perpetrators and different things like that to try to prevent older adults from talking to us. But what we can do, so we can investigate the reports that come into us. We perform protective needs assessments to basically determine what is happening in the home and kind of what level of risk there is for that person. And since we are an investigative agency, we are heavily reliant on those referrals. So we are making referrals to our area agencies on aging, to the medical providers, to hopefully get an order for home health to come into the home. We are also working with other agencies, whether it be like Utah Legal Services, we're working with other state agencies, essentially to help reduce that risk for that person, to help them age in the place that they're wanting to. So what we cannot do, and unfortunately the list of what we can't do is longer, but a big reason for that is that we work with adults and they have the right to self-determination, just like everybody in this room does. So the big things to know, we do not take custody of adults. We do not perform guardianship. We don't come and pull people out of their homes at the request of family members, providers, different things like that. We would never place somebody into a nursing home. The only time that we would ever take action like that is when we'd basically have to have an order by a judge. And so in order for that to happen is we have to basically write up the necessary statements and evidence to show that if we do not help basically place that person in a higher level of care, they will die within the next couple days. So that's kind of our threshold that we need to. And we've also had cases where we've gone in front of a judge and they'll say that's not enough. That person has the right to live in that situation, or that person has a right to remain there. So those are the situations where, and it would be called like an emergency removal. That's when we would be going into those situations, but it's still, that emergency is kind of a misnomer because it's usually several days. So it's not something where we just show up to somebody's home and we're automatically able to pull them out of there. The situations I can tell you that would match with what we would look to for emergency removals is a caregiver that's being arrested and being let out of the home. And the person that they're caring for is maybe not able to provide any care for themselves. They're not able to transfer from their bed to their wheelchair. They're not able to provide any food, take their medication, anything. So they're basically completely dependent on that caregiver. And now that caregiver is being arrested. So those are the situations that we're oftentimes looking for. It's not people that are choosing to live the way that they want and have it not match what other people feel like is important for them. The other thing that's important to know is that we cannot enter into somebody's home or remain in somebody's home without their consent. So we will get reports that come in, and then a couple days later, they'll call back in and say, why haven't you been out to see Mary? I've been out there a couple times. She didn't say anything about APS being out there. And a big reason is that people have the right to let us into their homes if they want. And so we don't do scheduled visits. We usually come unannounced. And so oftentimes we may just look like somebody soliciting. And so our investigators are taking the steps to, like, if they have a Ring camera, we're usually putting our badge up in front of the camera just so that they can recognize that we're not trying to sell them roofing repair or different things like that. Or we're not trying to like put grass seed down on their lawn, different things that we're not trying to solicit. But it's also, I've had situations where I will ring the doorbell, knock on the door several times. I can hear people moving in the home. I will call them from the front steps because that's the next thing, because I'm like, I know somebody's in there, and they will answer the phone and I will identify myself and say, I've actually been waiting outside a few minutes. I'm hoping to talk to you. And the response, even though we know it's a home phone, they will say, I'm not home. And that just happens a lot. I'm sure you guys have had cases where you've gone out to people's homes and you've knocked, you've tried to get in, you know that they're there and you just can't get in the home. So those are things that are happening. We are not, one thing I have heard from a provider once, they're like, well, he just leaves the door open on Tuesdays. So that's when we go. But that for us, we're not entering into that home just because we know the door is left unlocked. Because we're not a caregiver, we're not a provider, we don't have a trusted relationship. It would be the idea of you leaving your door unlocked and somebody just walking in and being like, well, it was unlocked, so I figured I would just try. So those are the things that we're kind of up against. So just things to kind of keep in mind. So looking at our abuse, neglect, and exploitation, we won't go through all of these, mainly because talking about all of the different allegations, it would be a full 8 hours that we'd be together to go through everything. But we'll kind of touch on the ones that we see most often. So this is our definition of abuse. It does come from our Utah Criminal Code. So this is kind of the threshold of where they would look at potentially looking at criminal charges for individuals. Our agency with APS, we do not file criminal charges against individuals. Ours is from a civil administrative side, but we do work with law enforcement for cases as we need to. So for the abuse, it's knowingly or intentional. And so that's kind of the big thing. So an example that I can give that we are seeing more and more is that in situations, maybe somebody is residing in a care center and they require a 2-person assist from their wheelchair to the toilet. So they've got 2 CNAs in the room, they're doing a proper lift and transfer. And as they are helping that person transition from the toilet back to their wheelchair, one of their legs hits the side of the wheelchair. And it's just something that happens from time to time. It's just if their feet aren't in the perfect placement for pivots, that can happen, that they can just hit against something, or it can hit against the rail that's maybe next to the toilet. So the CNAs ask if the person's okay, and they're like, yep, everything feels fine. As with bruising, as we know, oftentimes it can take several days to show up. So they check in with the person, maybe they make a note in the chart and just say that while we were transferring, they hit their leg. It doesn't look like there's any injury. But a family member comes 3 days later and they see a massive bruise on the side of this person's leg. And if this individual has a cognitive impairment, they may not remember where that bruise came from. And so that family member, it's like red alarms going off in their brain. They're like, my loved one is being abused because they have this massive bruise and they can't tell me where it came from. And so that's where having that idea, and whatever the language that you use for it, but for within social work, it's if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. And so that's where it's like, even if you're seeing something that doesn't appear to have caused an injury, anything like that, you want to document it. However it works in your system to make that report and put that in there, but it's an extra layer of liability coverage for you as a direct care provider. Because in those situations, then we go back and we get the nursing notes and it shows us 3 days ago that incident that happened, and they've noted the bruising ongoing. But if that person is visiting at 9:30 at night and it's just the overnight crew that's working there, they maybe aren't able to check the nursing notes to see that. So it's one of those things where we get called out on cases like that, and it's family members they're like, I'm pulling them out of this facility, like they're being abused, like you need to get in there and figure out what's happening. And it's generally just an error that happened or a mishap. But without that documentation, we look to see who was on staff, and if they didn't document it, it's hard for them to be able to kind of defend themselves in those situations. So the different types of abuse, the physical abuse, it's what we usually think about. So like the hitting, kicking, punching, pulling hair, shoving, those kind of things, anything that causes or results in like an injury or healing for that person. So it could be bruising, tears of the skin, it can be broken bones, different things like that. The other thing though is it's the unreasonable use of physical or chemical restraints. And so that's where we'd be looking at, we see it more in kind of care settings and group homes, to where there is maybe an individual that experiencing sundowners, and so they're medicated to keep them calm in the evening. And it's usually in there saying that they are potentially a danger to themselves, other residents, staff, because they become violent in the evening. But so they may have an order for medication, but they're being over-medicated in order to keep them docile in the facility so that it's not a liability for the staff. The other things that we are oftentimes seeing is same kind of care facility, group home setting, even in the homes, we're seeing this unfortunately, to where somebody that is maybe has a tendency to wander, and so they are being tied to their wheelchair or tied into their hospital bed or different things like that. And it's the family saying, well, if I have to leave the house, I'm worried that my mom's going to get out and I'm not going to be able to find her. So I have to be able, so it's kind of those things in their mind. It's not a malicious act, but they don't, then our follow-up question is, so what if there was a fire while you were gone? How would your mom be able to get out of the home? And so it's that idea of what other least restrictive measures need to be put into place. Like, do you need to have Ring cameras throughout the house and kind of on both entrances to the home? Do you need to put the door chimes in there so that you can hear when the door is being open? Those different things like that. But we have sometimes people that just kind of jump to that extreme because that's what's immediately available and what they want to do. So some indicators of abuse. These things in itself do not necessarily mean abuse is happening, but it's kind of, we'll talk about the behavioral indicators next, but when you have kind of what I like to, the hairs on the back of your neck, or you have those feelings where something just doesn't feel right, and then you maybe notice some physical indicators, and then you put the behavioral indicators together, it's usually a good indication that something's happening for that individual. And then the behavioral indicators. What's most important, I think, about this is, again, it does not necessarily mean that abuse is happening, but if you've got somebody that has a communication deficit, maybe related to a stroke or a physical impairment, but also could be related to a cognitive impairment, when you are noticing behavioral changes in that person when somebody would walk into the room, that's a good indication. So if we were sitting here and I was having a conversation with somebody, and then all of a sudden they're maybe just like nodding or maybe yes or no responses, it's very limited, but their spouse or their person walks into the room and they're walking in behind me, and that person's facial expressions, everything immediately changes. Like you can just see them kind of shut down. Like that's a very clear indication that there's something going on between that relationship with that person. Because if it was a trusted loved one that walked in, you'd either have no change in your affect or you'd probably start smiling. But we do see that where we're asking individuals questions and all of a sudden they immediately start looking to the floor, they start to kind of shut down, their shoulders start to hunch, different things like that. They are all of a sudden looking from side to side frequently to try to figure out where that person is. That is not a normal reaction to somebody walking into the room. So if you've seen something like that, take note of it, because it usually indicates something's happening. So looking at neglect. So also just for you guys to know, the photos that are used in here are photos that have been taken by investigators. So it's things that have happened across the state of Utah. What I can tell you in this photo and then in the one next, this was a gentleman in his 30s, and he had, I believe they said, a cognitive functioning and an intellectual functioning of around like a 3-year-old. And so his mom had been his caregiver his whole life, but she had never transitioned him out of essentially like infant or toddler formula. So he was being fed formula for all of his meals throughout his entire life. So he, and you'll see it more in the next photo, was down below like 70 pounds and had never been learned how to toilet or anything like that. So he still wore a diaper every day. And she provided the care for him that she felt was appropriate. And because she felt that the level of care needed to match his age. And so she continued to care for him essentially as a toddler, and without realizing the level of neglect that he was experiencing as it related to that. So when it looks at caretaker neglect, it's failure by that caretaker, and caretaker is anybody that is providing care. So it can be a kind of written professional agreement. So with home health, it's they're signing in and agreeing to these services. It can be a family member that's moving in to provide care. It can be a group home provider. It can be in the hospital, a nurse that's providing care, any of those individuals, or it could be a neighbor down the street that's helping you with things. Those are all people that we identify as a caregiver. It's failure of them to provide the necessary level of care for that individual. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, hold on. We'll get your...
So in cases like this one,
Mhm.
where the woman thought she was giving the correct care, what kind of punishment did they give her? Do they take that into account?
Yep. So it was taken into account. So this was a situation where it was 100% looked at that, yes, this is an emergency removal. Like he needs to be removed. He needed to be brought to the hospital immediately. Thankfully, she just agreed to it. So we were able to get into an ambulance. Unfortunately, he did die shortly after this, just due to the level of neglect that had happened. There will oftentimes will pursue charges if we can oftentimes show, and we'll go into that next part, that intentional failure by that provider. For her, it was some cognitive impairments and mental health. So she was, to her ability, providing the best level of care that she thought that she could. The big thing, though, is, we'll shift back for a moment, it's that failure to provide care in a reasonable manner that somebody else would provide. And so those are the things that we're looking at. So an example I can give is, if maybe you have somebody that you are providing home health services for, is it generally like once a day that you would go out and see the person at the most? Or is it ever situations where you'd be seeing them like in the morning and in the evening? Both? Okay. So let's say, I'll just pick 2 random names. So Sarah goes and sees this individual in the morning and helps them get up in the morning, helps them shower, take care of their needs. If maybe they are using a brief, they're helping make sure that they're able to get their brief changed. And then, so Sarah leaves, does her thing, and then Stephanie comes in the later afternoon and still needs to do all of those same things. Say maybe the person has been incontinent, so needs to help get that person changed. But they are now saying like, well, I've got a few other things. Somebody else will be coming later. They'll help you change your brief then. So it's that idea that it's what 2 reasonable people would do. Would they be doing that same level of care as described in their position? And so we see that more with like higher levels of care. So like nursing home settings, to where a CNA will come in the morning and help provide cares. And then in the afternoon, that person needs that same level of care. And they're like, well, it's almost shift change, so we'll just wait for the next person to come and help you get changed, and different things like that. Or we're seeing it in the overnight shifts of where those things are happening. Any other questions as it relates to caretaker neglect? Okay. We'll shift into, this has been put in there mainly as it relates to those that are providing direct care. So it's not just home health agencies, it's also, this is the same information that's given for staff that are working in like assisted living care centers, different things, group home settings, different things. The big thing to know, and if you have worked with a long-term care ombudsman, kind of a phrase that we have adopted is that, especially in like the long-term care settings, is that you work where that person lives, they don't live where you work. And so it's that idea that you are entering into there, even though it's a place that you may enter into, And if you are working at all in care level settings, that you, every time you're entering into their room, you're entering into their home. And so it's that idea, even if that person leaves their door unlocked on Tuesdays for you to come in, I would hope that you're still knocking, announcing yourself, and waiting for that person to say, yes, come in. Instead of just being like, well, this is our routine, I'm just going to go in because I know that they leave their door unlocked. For the same reason that it's kind of that idea of, and we'll talk next about what passive neglect is, but that idea that when you're there with them, like that's your energy and that's your time. So it's, if you need to document, if you need to take a phone call, plan around that time to be able to provide the level of care, kind of goes back to making sure that you're giving enough time to arrive to the appointment. Because I have arrived places late and it's just stressful and it just sets the tone for while you're there. And so it's one of those things where you want to do as many things as you can to show as much respect for that person, because they're in a very vulnerable position for you to be there providing care for them. So those things that we're wanting to recognize. So has anybody heard of the term passive neglect before? A little bit? Okay. So what it is, it's the idea that it's failure by that caretaker to provide the necessities because they are failing to understand that person's needs. So you're physically there. You're helping them with the things. Let's say you are helping get them showered in the morning. So you're there, but you also have your headphones in. So you're listening to music, you're doing other things. You are responding to a text message while that person's, maybe they're a standby assist. And so you're texting on your phone while that person is in the shower. It's those things where it's kind of that idea of the lights are on, but nobody's home. So like you're there, but you're not really there providing care for that person. And it may seem pretty benign, but what can happen is it becomes a pattern. If you do it at one home, you'll start doing it at other homes. You will all of a sudden start taking personal phone calls during the time that you are providing care for somebody. And that leads into the idea to where it opens the door for somebody to get injured, somebody to get hurt, different things like that to happen. So it's kind of that idea that we want to make sure that when you are providing care for somebody, that you're just there and present and able to show them that respect. And I would have assumed that there's a good number of those that you're serving in the community that your interaction with them may be the only interaction that they have during the day. And so that time is valuable to them. So we want to kind of show that in both ways. And then looking at self-neglect. So has anybody seen a kitchen like this? And if it's your own kitchen, you don't have to raise your hand. But if you've seen a kitchen like this, it's something that we are seeing more and more. One of the big reasons is it goes way back to that first slide, is our population growth of older adults has just grown exponentially. And so we are seeing, the number of people that I've seen as a former investigator that have lived in their homes for over 60 years. It's amazing to see, but also think of how much stuff you can accumulate in 60 years. Like I've been in my current home for 4.5 years, and I'm amazed how often we have to declutter and get rid of stuff. I mean, I have 2 little kids and they bring everything home, but it's that same idea. Like what do they say? You're supposed to keep your taxes for 7 years. Now take that into somebody that's lived in their home for 60 years. They probably have 60 years worth of taxes in their home. That's a lot of paper. There's a lot of things that are happening. So we are seeing a rise in those concerns for self-neglect for older adults living in their home. The big thing I will say though is that with this picture, if the kitchen has looked like this for their entire adult life, this is a lifestyle choice. They're choosing to live in this environment. If their home has looked pretty well kept and the person is usually showered, changing their clothes, or when you see them, they're active in their care and wanting to do all of those hygiene needs. But now over the last couple months, you're starting to notice a decline in that. And maybe they are refusing showers, or they're like, I don't really want to brush my teeth anymore. Or you ask them if maybe one of the things that you do is just to help watch them take their medication. And you notice and you see their pill box and it's a Thursday and all of the meds are still in the pill box. So those are the kind of things that we're looking for as it relates to self-neglect. But we do get cases like this or calls that will come in and say like, my neighbor has hoarded their home for 30 years. Like there's rats coming all over the place now. Like we need to get somebody in here. We need to get these things cleaned up. If you own or occupy your home in Utah, you have a right to live in the environment that you want, even if it doesn't match what your neighbors think, what your family thinks, different things like that. If you reside in a care setting, a shared living space, a apartment complex, the liability is different. You do have to maintain a level of that, but we do have And you will especially notice those homes in the summer because the smells just kind of start coming out of them a little bit more. In the winter, it's usually a little bit harder to notice until you get into the home, but that is their right to live in that situation. Any questions as it relates to hoarding? Because that usually tends to be a big thing where people are like, well, what about in this situation? So the one thing I will say is I know I'm being recorded, but if you would have concerns for somebody, or if somebody would have concerns, there are steps to kind of initiate the health department to come out to look at the home for concerns. It's mainly that there have to be multiple complaints or multiple calls within the same time period, not like over a couple weeks, like in the same day, like multiple people calling and complaining, and that will oftentimes trigger the health department to come out to see if it is like an environmental hazard for that person or not. So it is recorded, but you didn't hear it from me. It's just say like, oh, I just learned this randomly somewhere. So indicators of neglect, again, these do not necessarily indicate that neglect is happening, but these were photos that were taken by investigators throughout the state of situations that were happening as it related to, the first one was caretaker neglect, the second two were self-neglect. And what we are also seeing more and more is due to mobility issues, individuals are having a harder time removing their trash from their home, so they're doing the best they can. So in this situation, they were literally bagging up their feces and their trash because their toilet had become overflowed. And so they were doing the best that they could, but they couldn't get out to the garbage every day. So they were just kind of bagging things, and then it just became too much. So we do situations. I've also seen on an older adult that was living on a 3rd floor apartment, and it was kind of that external entrance. So he could not get up and down the stairs every day. So he would take his trash and put it into the small shopping bags, double bag it, and throw it over his balcony. And then like every couple days, he would go down the stairs when he needed to leave and collect everything and throw it away. But from an apartment standpoint, his neighbors were like outraged. Like, we have all this trash all over. Like, how are we supposed to handle these situations? But for him, he was making the best of like the worst situation. So it's kind of a challenge for how do people, but he really wanted to stay in that apartment because he had been living there for a long time. His rent had not continued to go up exponentially like most places do. And he was just waiting for a 1st floor apartment to open up, but he was just kind of buying his time because he didn't want to lose the apartment. So one question that we do oftentimes get is for a vulnerable adult, so who we kind of identified at the beginning, what rights do they have as it relates to our investigation? And so since we are working with adults, if we have determined that they have the capacity to consent, they can voluntarily say, no, I don't want to work with you. I don't want APS to be involved. So that is something we do have to honor the right of self-determination for individuals with the capacity to consent. And what that means is kind of that area that's bolded down there. They have the right to make decisions that don't appear to be in their best interest or not in the best interest of providers, families, different things like that. So that's just kind of the right. Most of us at some point have made a very poor decision at some point this week that could have impacted our health. I can tell you specifically, a couple days ago, I was getting my kids out the door and I was making sure they were buckled and everything like that. I was driving down the road, down our street, and I could not figure out where the pinging noise was coming from. And it's because I hadn't buckled my seatbelt. I was so focused on everything else, but if I had been on the freeway, it could have been a very different story. So it's kind of those things where we're sometimes not actively making those choices, but I would assume that there's something that everybody's done, maybe in the last month, that maybe we're not in their best interest, but you're an adult and you have the right to make that decision. Let's see what time it is. Okay, we got like 10 minutes, so I keep flying through. So financial exploitation, it is our #1 fastest growing allegation in Utah, across the US. Unfortunately, does anybody have any guess of why financial exploitation would be our #1 allegation that they feel brave enough to throw an answer out?
Well, I mean, some of these relatives, they want their money, and and the person I've seen.
Do you want to yell it in here?
They have access to the money, so they use it.
They have access to the money, so they use it?
Yep, absolutely. And the biggest and the easiest thing is that perpetrators and abusers, they follow the money. So they are going to follow, and there's so much wealth in Utah. It's one of those things, and most of the wealth that's held in Utah is by those that are 70 plus. And so majority of the money that is either in the banks, in land, in ownership, and different things like that is held by our older adults in the community. And a lot of our family members know that. So because they've grown up knowing that their grandparents have a lot of money. And so now their grandpa is widowed and he maybe needs a little bit more care. And that granddaughter is more than happy to move in and start helping him get his groceries and start helping him pay his bills. And well, if you give me your debit card, I can go and run these errands for you. And remind me what your PIN number is. And so all of a sudden, he's trusted this person for 40 years, and he's also trusting her to pay all the bills. And now all of a sudden, he's getting these collection notices and doesn't understand why. And the other thing that we're seeing a lot is, which it's one of those things where I know that I've become a little bit cynical in this work, and I don't trust anybody. I'm sure you are wonderful people, but I don't trust most people just because we see a lot of these trusted caregivers that are the ones that are perpetrators. And the big thing is that these older adults are trusting in these people. The amount of times that we will see that they will allow their paid caregiver access to their debit card and their PIN number to go run errands for them. It's staggering how often it's happening. And what they don't realize is a lot of these older adults, we had one, he was like 96. He didn't even know that cash back was a thing. He didn't realize that when you used your debit card at the grocery store that you could take money out on it. And so his caregiver each time would take $20. And it was once a week that she was going to the store, or he wanted cigarettes, and so she would go more often for him. And so very quickly his bank account had been drained. And he didn't understand how it was happening until we pulled his bank statements and he could see the cash back or cash advance each time on his card without having any idea that that was happening. But it had been months at that point. And so there was very little that could be done to collect that money for him, unfortunately. So who's kind of exploiting our vulnerable adults? One of the big things that we will see is when legal documents are being changed, even when that person has a diagnosed cognitive impairment. Or if somebody, let's say you've designated somebody as your power of attorney, they have served in that position for 20 years, they haven't had to do anything, and now all of a sudden magically somebody else is being designated. Like that's a red flag. Like unless there's been a falling out between those two individuals, why would all of a sudden suddenly somebody else be named on those financial documents or different things? The other thing is, does anybody in here serve as like a financial like payee, anything like that, where you are managing the funds for like a loved one or somebody else? Is it a fun job to do? No, it's a terrible job. So if you ever see anybody that is actively saying, yes, I will help manage your money for you, that's a red flag. Like if I'm listed as the executor on my parents' estate and I'm dreading it because it essentially serves as a full-time job because you can't commingle funds. You have to keep receipts for everything. You have to account for things, especially if the people receive Social Security. You need to account at the end of each year how those assets were being used. And so it's recommended to keep an actual physical ledger and write down and balance and keep receipts for an entire year. So it's a lot of work. So if people are actively jumping at it, something's going on to why they would want to take on that position. So personal dignity exploitation. Has anybody heard this term or this phrase? If you haven't, it's totally okay because it's new since 2019. And it's not super known yet. So essentially what this means, and this was put into place in 2019, this is our one allegation that we can work with law enforcement to criminally prosecute individuals. And essentially what this is saying, this is how the whole code is written out, but I'll give you just kind of the synopsis. It's where a actor, a caregiver, somebody in a position is essentially taking a photo, an image, a video, and knowingly transmitting it to somebody else. And what it is it's somebody that is in a vulnerable adult in a compromising position to where they do not have the ability to consent. So it could be an example that we've seen, unfortunately, is a older adult sitting on the toilet in a care setting. They are incontinent, and so maybe they have feces on their leg. They need to get in the shower, and the CNA will take a photo of the person on the toilet and send it to their partner and say, look what I have to deal with today. So it's kind of that idea of, and hopefully we'll have time, but we'll talk about kind of burnout and different things like that. But what we're seeing is people are not necessarily maliciously doing it, but they don't recognize that they've just committed a crime by sending that photo. The other thing that we've seen is caregivers that are basically provoking older adults with cognitive impairments into swearing, spitting, violently acting out, and then they're putting it on social media. And so the big thing is they're saying, they're like, well, they're never going to see it. Like, they have dementia, they're never going to see it, but their family members see that TikTok video and they recognize their loved ones right away. And so those are the things that, as benign as it may seem, and it may seem harmless in a sense, but you are actually committing a crime by doing that, and you can be criminally prosecuted for it. So the one thing I will say, because I will imagine you guys do have to take photos from time to time of like an injury or maintenance of things to maybe have it added to the chart or different things. If it's for a medical purpose, you need to make sure that you are documenting it, making sure it gets to the chart, however it is, and then you are immediately deleting it off your phone. So that's the big thing. I recommend, if you just, in the role that you do, frequently go through your phone to make sure that there's not photos like that that are just sitting in your camera roll or anything like that. And if they are, please delete them and make sure it's documented why it was on your phone to begin with. So some barriers to reporting to APS. Some of these that we talked about already. The biggest one, unfortunately, that we see is wanting to protect the perpetrator. Since we know that majority of the perpetrators are adult children, spouses, immediate family members, they don't want their loved one to get into trouble. So we have a number of people that will allow things to happen in order to prevent that person from getting into trouble. So, which is pretty staggering to see, but we're seeing it more and more. The cost of caring, this was, I think her name was Mary. She had mentioned at the beginning talking about like caregiver wellness and well-being. Has anybody heard the term the cost of caring? A little bit? Okay. So essentially what it is the idea and the knowledge that providing direct care is very challenging. It's a very difficult job to do. And so is anybody in here a manager or supervisor? Couple? Okay. So the big thing with this is the idea that, and think about this from yourself, and then if you are in kind of a supervisor role at all, if you were feeling like your day was getting more challenging, it was harder for you to come to work, you were feeling less empathy, do you feel like you could trust your supervisor to go talk to them about that? Or do you feel you'd be like, oh, it's just an off day, things will get better, I'll just keep pushing through it? Most people would go with the latter. They're just going to say, things will get better, I'll just deal with it. But one hard day becomes 2 hard days and becomes more and more and more. And then all of a sudden you're calling out to work, you're showing up late for services, you are doing shortcuts, you are documenting care that's not happening. We're seeing that more and more, where they're saying that this person was fed a meal, given a shower, made sure they took their meds, where in reality that wasn't happening. The big thing to know is if you are in a manager or a supervisor position, if you wait for your staff to come to you to tell you that that's happening, you're going to wait a long time. So you need to be able to recognize those signs in yourself, in your coworkers, in the staff that are within your team, all of those different things, mainly to be able to develop a self-care plan and know what you can do to stay in the workforce, because otherwise you will likely leave the workforce and then it just kind of becomes a cycle of training and maintaining. So the sandwich generation. Here's another phrase. Most people have not heard of this. This has kind of become my new favorite conversation piece to talk about. And what it is it's a whole generation of people. So people that are kind of young to middle-aged adults who are raising young children and supporting kind of their aging parents. Does anybody fit into that category? Yeah. So, used to? Yeah. So it's one of those things where I can tell you just quickly, personal anecdote, I have a 3-year-old and a newly 7-year-old. So I've got 2 little kids. And about a year and a half ago, my mother-in-law tripped over the dog, fell and broke her hip. And she lives in Wisconsin. So magically, my husband and I were both social workers. We are trying to navigate and coordinate with a hospital in Wisconsin for her discharge and to make sure that her home was appropriate for her, basically 2,000 miles away, while I'm also feeding my kids dinner. So it was one of those things, and I was also still doing this job full time. So it was kind of managing between those 3 areas. And I will tell you, I was not acing it in all those areas. It was more my self-care went down tremendously because I knew my kids needed to be fed. They needed to get where they needed to go. And I knew my mother-in-law needed to have a safe place to come home to. So it was, for me, I did a lot of my work in the evening times and during the overnight so that I had time during the day to manage like those other needs for individuals. So they say that almost half of 40 to 50-year-olds have a parent that's age 65 or older while they're also caring for a young child or a grown adult. So that could be having somebody that's your oldest is 18 to 25 and still living at home. That's in that category, and you're also caring for an aging parent in some way. Or you're taking the responsibility of a neighbor that lives down the street and providing care for them, while you're also needing to try to balance full-time work, manage your finances, do all of the other things that you're doing on a daily basis. So that's what we're talking about when we refer to the sandwich generation. If you have not been in it, they say that everybody will be in that category at some point in their life. It may not be in that 40 to 50. You maybe were in your, like for me, being in my 30s, that's when it happened to me. But so it's one of those things where it will happen at some point in your life that you will fit into that category and how you're trying to manage and balance things. So we will, how to report to us, because I know, I'm a little bit over. So this, in Utah specifically, we are mandatory reporters. Everybody here is regardless of your role. And so if you do have any concerns for a vulnerable adult, you are mandated to report that to Adult Protective Services or law enforcement. A lot of folks think that it's social workers, doctors, teachers, caregivers, different things like that, that are mandated reporters. It's a good thing for you to know that your spouse is a mandated reporter, even if they work in finance, or like your neighbors down the street, different things like that. If you would notice a concern for somebody that you're not providing care for, you're still mandated to report to Adult Protective Services if you would have concerns, for the same reason that you're mandated to report to Child Protective Services. So here's our reporting information. Again, I will leave our new kind of intake business cards. It does have the QR code on there. Our intake staff are there Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. And so if you would notice something on like an evening, a Saturday morning, Sunday, midday, something like that, and if you want to make the report, you can go to our website and make that report. Because if you wait until Monday, life happens, so many other things will happen. So it does give you the option for both of those things. So quickly, just what you need to report, who the vulnerable adult is, as much identifying information as you can with them. It seems maybe not necessary, but any safety concern. So if there's pets in the home, even if it's the friendliest golden retriever, please let us know that there's a dog in the home. I can tell you I've been bitten by a dog going out to do because the person thought that the dog was friendly. So also, if there's any environmental concerns, if there's weapons in the home, anything like that is important for us to know. If there is an alleged perpetrator, who that person is. And then collateral information is sometimes the most important. That's family members, providers, doctors, anybody else that would be able to share information with us as well. And then your information as the referent. So what I will tell you is that you do have the option to remain anonymous. We do not release your information. We will have cases where the individual will spend majority of the visit saying, well, it had to have been this person. It had to have been this person. Tell me, it had to have been this person. And they just guess, but we will never disclose who that person is. Your information is protected. So you can remain anonymous, but just know if you do release your information to us, we will not release your information to anybody at all. And then lastly, here is my information. I know we are over. If you have any questions, otherwise, please take a picture of this, write my phone number down. You can call me, text me. I have a lot of folks that do that afterwards because they'll think of something on the next visit they go out to and different things like that. A lot of the medical providers will email and say, they'll give me just a brief situation and they're like, is this something I need to report? So feel free to do that as well. But yeah, thank you guys for your questions.
Thank you.
I know I spewed a whole lot of information really quickly, but thank you.
Okay, there's a green light on. Does that mean it's on? Okay. Thank you, Megan. I'll turn it over to Karen in just a minute. But I just want to say what she was talking about, if you felt comfortable talking to someone rather than, when you've got a little burnout. I just want you to know that Allison has her phone 24/7. She answers it 24/7. She texts 24/7. She wants to be there for you anytime you need her. So this last week, I went in to fill a shift and I ended up having to call 911 because the client ended up on the floor. I was stressed out. I got done with my shift, came here to the office and just kind of went, and everybody took care of me. And Allison, we talked about it. We've done a lot of talking to say, okay, how could we have handled this better? But, whatever. But she helped me go home, and I was able to go home and not take it with me. Does that make sense? So, but she wants to be there for you. She is there for you, and you just need to utilize that resource because she will help you. Okay, I'll turn it over to Karen.
What do we do with those papers that Mary?
Oh, Mary's upstairs, but you can also just turn them in upstairs. Okay. All right. Megan, thank you so much. This is for you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. Let
You
me.
were standing in the way the whole time. I couldn't get.
Yes. Let me. Pull it back up.
I couldn't get this far away. It's gonna work.
Karen, do you still want the recording link?
no. Thank you.